Marin Fire History proudly presents Families in Fire, the story of the generations of fire service personnel in Marin County.
Good day, and welcome to the Marin County Fire Services historical website. Today we have the pleasure to introduce you to a person who I consider to be a matriarch of the Marin County Fire Service. This young lady represents over 5 generations of fire service. Her great uncle was a chief officer in Oakland in the 1800s, and at the time of the 06 earthquake, actually came into San Francisco with a steam engine and helped control the fire. So her father, Frank Nelson, served the town of Corte Madera 26 years as a police chief and 43 years as a fire chief when he retired. Her husband, Jack Forster, gave the town of Corte Madera 20 years of service with the Larkspur Volunteers, along with uncles, and her brother was in the business. Her son Tom served as a Larkspur Volunteer from 1976 until for about 35 to 40 years total service, and we'll talk a little more about that. And without any further ado, it was a great pleasure to introduce Diane Forster, the daughter of Frank Nelson. And with that said, Diane, thank you for inviting us to your home here, this beautiful home in the town of Corte Madera, Marin County, California. And please tell us about your recollection of your time in the fire service.
Thank you, Phil, for having me. I really appreciate. Well, it goes way back to before World War II. When I was born in 1936, and my father was a volunteer fireman at that time, and was serving as the chief and treasurer of the department. And in 1943, he was hired by the town of Corte Madera as police chief, while also serving as fire chief. That was an unpaid position at the time. And he was a tax collector also for the fire department. And he was building inspector, superintendent of streets, and the dog catcher and tax collector. Anyway, he was known as the man who wore 6 hats. And also during the war, he was an air raid warden. So I just remember, when that siren went off, he went out in the street to make sure everyone had their black curtains up and, were prepared for anything that might happen. So in 1969, the town grew in population and there was more revenue, and Dad was given the choice of being the police chief or fire chief, and he chose the fire chief's position. And he always said there never was a dull moment when he had all those jobs. So anyway, you mentioned my Uncle Bill. He served as a volunteer around the same time. And then his son-in-law, Harold Kelly, owned the grocery store, the Village Corner in Corte Madera, and he was also a volunteer. Then,
did you have a brother that served also?
Yes, I was going to mention him. My youngest brother, Jim. I have 2 brothers, Frank Jr. and Jim Nelson, and he served 7 years as a volunteer for the Corte Madera department, and then he attended Chico College and served for 2 years as a volunteer with the Chico Fire Department. And then my oldest daughter, Lynn's husband, served for 46 years as a volunteer firefighter in Southern and Northern California. And And then there was my cousin, Ron Nelson, and he was fire chief of Bernie.
Now, Bernie, I remember Bernie started his career after coming out of the Navy. He worked for Alto, Chief Heinen, and then we were fortunate enough to have him come work for us in Larkspur. And then he became a lieutenant with us. And then the next thing I knew, Ronnie had taken it and won the position as a fire chief in Bernie. And that's where he finished his career. So there was some nice history there. Yeah.
Yes.
Go ahead. Yeah.
So then I was married in 1955. Jack and I were married then. And
How did you guys meet?
Where did we meet? We met
How
on
did you meet?
Okay, we met on a blind date right up the street where I live from this home. And he and I both went to Drake High School, but he was 2 years ahead of me. So I never knew him in high school. So on this, we met on a blind date with our good friends. And we were married in 1955. And Jack became a volunteer in 1956 with the Corte Madera Department and served for 20 years as captain. And so then we had 4 children, and my oldest, Lynn, who lives in up in Washington, California, and then along came Tom, and Tom always dreamt of becoming a volunteer fireman. His both his grandfather and father were his mentors, and he just dreamed of this. He was going to be a Corte Madera volunteer, but unfortunately, they disbanded in 1976.
Yeah,
and I remember it to this day. Standing there with him, his father and I, and he said, "What am I going to do?" And his father said very calmly, "I think you're going to have to see about going to Larkspur."
Yeah.
And the rest is history.
Yeah, it is. So what did Jack do for a living?
He was started out as the gardener for the city of Fairfax, and then worked for a landscape company, Pagwin and Dorward, as their foreman, and then decided to go into business. And he started a residential landscape business, and then eventually went into commercial landscape maintenance and took in a partner.
And that partner was
and that was Chuck Krager.
And
Forster and Krager was the name of the
they
company.
worked together in Fairfax?
No. All over. All over
that
the
was
county.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, they had shopping centers and
yeah, I can remember driving by the Richmond refinery one hot summer day, coming across the Sarafell Bridge, and I knew Tom at the time. Because in those days everyone wore long hair, kind of Dutch boy haircuts and stuff. And I remember Tom with no shirt on, just driving by and recognized him, and he was just digging at the landscape and cleaning it all up, working probably a summer for his father.
yes, that was our biggest account was the Richmond refinery. Yes, and I think oh my goodness, a lot of the neighborhood boys worked for our company. Jack would hire them in the summer.
Yeah.
And
but we're going back to originally your grandfather or great grandfather was in the milk business in Corte Madera.
He worked for the Pixley family that had a dairy ranch in Larkspur, where it used to be called Owlswood.
Yeah.
And it was renamed Chevy Chase Park.
Yeah.
And that's right. He was the caretaker for the ranch.
Okay. And how did your father and mother meet up?
Well, my grandparents in in San Francisco, they had 6 children, and every summer they would rent a house in the Larkspur Canyon. And my father delivered milk from well, that was the Corte Madera Creamery at the time when they moved to Corte Madera after the ranch. But anyway, he delivered milk, and my mother would wait outside with her milk bottles, and that's how they met.
And they were avid tennis players, if I recall.
Yes, they were. They played at those courts in Larkspur.
Yeah, I can remember going by and watching it was a tennis court. You could see the Nelsons. And I was one of those things that you never imagined Frank Nelson as an athlete. You don't look at him in that way. And then all of a sudden seeing his wife well into their age, still actively hitting that ball over that net. And
That's
they
correct.
seem to really enjoy it. And I will say one thing about your father. Looking back on my history with him, when I came into the fire service in 1958, the name Nelson was well known because of Frank's time and grade here in Corte Madera. But at scenes of fires, the one thing I picked up from your father was he was a very patient man. He never got. I don't really ever seen Frank excited at a scene, and but for your father, sadly, because of at that time there were satellites of the county surrounded by Corte Madera, like where Marin Joe's up there on the frontage road, and across the street where Denny's and those places used to be, were not in the town of Corte Madera. But Frank and the volunteers would respond to calls at the restaurants and so forth, and it got political where he was ordered by the council. I remember this. He would lose it. He would be fired if he went into the county area again. Because they wanted to annex the county pockets. And it wasn't to be at that time until we had a working structure fire on the other side of the highway where they stopped at the city limits. They stopped their engines and did not proceed into the fire. And he was on the orders. And the fire finally got out with Marin County and Larkspur and stuff like that. But he was in a very, very difficult situation that he had no control of. And I always felt bad for Frank to have to work under those circumstances. We go and help people. And to be ordered that you'll lose your job, retirement, whatever, if you were to proceed into it. And the loss of that house was the straw that broke the back. And they finally decided they should annex into Corte Madera, and it came to be. But it was a very tedious moment in Frank's life, I'm sure. But anyway, so your dad retired and went on to play tennis.
Yes.
Yeah.
And travel with my mother.
And another sad thing that happened in Corte Madera, because you and I had been in the business about the same length of time, they were going to replace your father when he retired. The city manager and council decided not to get the job automatically till Lee Lawson, who was then the assistant chief. They were going to go outside and open the job to the outside, and the volunteers didn't like that, and they wanted the council to reconsider and give it to Lee.
Yes.
And the council and the city manager, I knew them all, would not yield to the end. And that's the reason why they disbanded. And I believe Jack was probably the chairman of the volunteers at the time.
Yes, he was the president.
Yeah.
And that was very unfortunate, the way
terrible.
it was handled.
Yeah,
They wanted complete control of the volunteers department, and they had bylaws, that were in existence for 65 years.
Yes.
And they wanted to, forget about the bylaws.
Right, yeah.
And those
really,
men, a volunteer fire department, they're bonded, they're so close and knit, and
they actually built the firehouse. And it's no
Yes, they
longer there,
did.
but
That's right, in
they built the
1920.
firehouse and
Yes,
bought the first engine, the real big engine,
yes,
and
I
had
know.
hose cuts throughout the town. So the locals could grab the hose cuts from a shed someplace and go to a fire. And
Yeah.
in a small town in those days, I know when I came to Loxer in '58, the population was only 5,000 people, and Corte Madera was probably a little smaller.
When I was growing up, it was 1,700.
1,700. So
Yeah.
you can see in a small little village like Corte Madera, to split the town in half, one on one side with the council and the other one's with the volunteers. It's a very, very sensitive situation for friends and relatives,
Exactly.
and that's what happened. And it was a shame. And the sad part about it was the gentleman who got the job only took a leave of absence from the Department of Southern California and gave it up in about 6 weeks. And they went back to, they hired, I think, I'm not sure if they hired Montenero, Chief Montenero.
Yes.
Yeah, and he
you're
got the
right.
job, but Lee didn't get the job, which was kind of sad because Lee was a good, dedicated. He was the only guy on duty when Frank was running the department. He was the on-duty guy Monday through Friday. So it's a little piece of history that there's not a few. There was only a few of us around that remember them.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
and so let's get back to now. Now the volunteers are disbanded, and Tom is just about ready to turn 18, which most of the time you had to be at least 18 to join a volunteer fire department here in the county. And so what was Tom doing in the meantime? He was going to school
Yes.
with the University of Cal for a while?
Yes, he did.
And why did he leave Cal and go to Chico State?
He just Cal was a little bit too large, too big for him. He missed that
smallness.
Yes, he
Yeah.
needed a smaller college.
I can't
to
imagine.
further
You get into Cal. You just don't get into Cal. You get into Cal. We're looking at Paul Smith across the room, and he got into Cal. So I mean, what's that say about Cal? No. Only kidding, Paul.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, Tom had it. Tom could have gone to any
he could have gone
university in the country.
He could have gone to Annapolis if he wanted to.
Yeah,
He picked Cal.
but that wasn't Tom. He was a small town.
Yeah, you got to think maybe by that time when the town was 2,000, maybe 3,000 people.
Well,
It's still a small town. Everyone knows everyone. So
it's just the way Tom was.
Yeah.
So he said he thought we would be very disappointed, and we said, "Oh no,
yeah,
you have to do what you
and
will make
luckily,
you happy." And he chose Chico.
and luckily for us, he took his dad's advice and came to Larkspur and asked for. In those days, you pretty much had to live in town to be a volunteer. That was one of the number one goal. If you live in town, you could be a volunteer. If you didn't live in town, how could you respond to our needs? But Tom lived in Corte Madera. He lived as close to the firehouse as many volunteers did who lived up in Drum Canyon and stuff like that. And luckily for us, they accepted Tom as a volunteer as soon as he turned 18. And he served Larkspur for well over 40 years to his passing. He was still a member of the volunteers all those years and helped with the new bylaws and was just a wonderful, wonderful member of the volunteer fire department. But it's kind of funny when he was at Chico State in the summertime, we always have to hire a vacation relief person. And being in those days, a volunteer was always offered the jobs. There was never open competition. Just if you had a volunteer that knew the basic firefighting skills, and when it was a paid man's position, pretty much offered to a volunteer, and most of the time they would take it. So we had an opening, and I remember, well, Tom's going to be our next fireman. And I asked Tom, would you like to be a fireman in Larkspur? And he turned us down. It really set it back. What do you mean he turned you down? He had some job up Lucas Valley offered to him. Someplace. So he got a job with the Lucas, who had just opened the ranch. And he was hired to work with the fire brigade. And that turned out to be a while. But he still stayed with Larkspur. he turned out to run the ranch for 40-some years almost up there at the ranch. And so he got his wish, became a volunteer at 18, and turned out also a lot of people forget when Tom moved out of Marin County up to Plumas County. He was the volunteer up there at Plumas Eureka Volunteer Fire Department. He was assistant chief, and then he was appointed chief for the volunteers. And he would commute from Plumas County down to the ranch there in Marin, his wife, and so
she retired.
She retired, and
she was
I remember
George's.
him. He would come down for a week at a time, something like that, and then he'd go back home for a week. But it was very tedious, very tough trying to
very hard.
come down on a moment's notice.
Yes,
You know, as they say. So he had a wonderful, wonderful career and did a wonderful, wonderful job for the Marin County Fire Service. And Joe, I am told that you now you have a grandson that served in the fire service up in Red Bluff.
Yes, correct.
And Chris
Martin.
Chris Martin was and he was a big boy, I'm told. 6 foot something?
6'5".
Well, that's big. That's tall. Yeah. I wish I was that. So and he had to retire because of injuries, right?
He actually, yes, for health reasons.
Yeah.
He had to retire.
Yeah,
unfortunately.
That was it.
Tom kind of helped him.
That's
led him
true.
through the training and so forth that was required.
But
he's very
going back to Skywalker, now you can keep in mind the Skywalker Ranch is a multi-million-dollar industrial complex up in the Lucas Valley, and Tom was hired to basically organize the fire brigade. And then the one thing to this day I remember the first 5 or 6 guys that they were hired. Tom was very, very smart. He hired all Larkspur volunteers. So there's a book that was written by Jim Busher, a former Larkspur fireman, and Matt Gustafson, a Larkspur fireman. And it's called The History of the Skywalker Ranch. And in here, one of the first fire trucks is an old 1954 Jimmy that we had and donated to Nicasio, who in turn donated to the Skywalker Ranch. So it was kind of neat to see that new fire brigade, that licensed fire brigade in the state of California that Tom organized with Matt and Jim and John Boyd from Larkspur. So we had in Craig Weichel, all the Larkspur guys who Tom was quick enough to recognize their skills in doing so. I remember I promised you I would give you a copy of the book written by Jim and Matt. I hope you enjoy it. A lot of good memories in that one.
Yes.
So anyway, I thank you for inviting us into your home today and sharing your history of the Marin County Fire Service. And I'm told when you add up all the years Tom did this kind of thing, Tom estimated with all of the people in his fire service that related to the Nelsons and the gentleman in Oakland, is over 270 years of fire service to the communities and their fellow citizens. So that is quite an accomplishment. And I know you're very proud of it, your history with the fire department, and you should be. That's quite an event. So I thank you so much for inviting us into your home, sharing your history with us, and I think we got another 60 years ahead of us. so
thank you, Bill.
Yeah, it's our pleasure. So with that, we'll sign off for today, and everybody be good out there, and we'll see you next time down the road. Thank you.